Hi, I'm Ann Coulter. Welcome to my Substack. I have my favorite person, Heather McDonald, back today because we've been chatting like mad across text about all of the craziness going on in politics, and particularly with the Democratic Party. I do want to point out that Heather and I both won our multiple bets that Biden was not going to stay in this race, would not be the nominee. Although, Heather, you made the mistake of putting a time limit on it. Welcome, Heather.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. But I now have another bet out, not with you, but on who wins the presidential race. And we won't talk about that yet because I don't want to alienate all your readers too soon. But yes, I mean, we've been through one reversal after another. I don't know how the human psyche can take this constant churn of upsets. You know, we were both texting each other during the debate that it's over. It turned out not to be over. And after the shooting, one thought it's over. It turned out not to be over. The press has a fantastic capacity to put things simply down the memory hole. And the shooting, I have to say, feels like ancient history. And frankly, sort of irrelevant to bring up at this point. So who knows what sort of reversals we're going to have from here on in.
Yes, and luckily I do surprisingly disagree with you only slightly on who is going to win the election. But I really like your reasoning, but we'll get to that later. One of the funniest things I thought we've seen from the media was after, 3-4 weeks of just vicious denunciations of Joe Biden and him being a stubborn ass. I don't even care what happens to the Democratic Party. And I was getting annoyed with him. He lost his entire base of support. He lost the voters. He was losing the polls. He clearly lost the donors. He lost the New York Times day one. And then Hakeem Jeffries, Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi all go public with the fact that we tried to do this the easy way. We tried to talk you out of this. So then with a gun to his head, he does finally accede to the withdrawal demands. And suddenly, oh my gosh, he's like Abraham Lincoln. This is the most selfless, wonderful thing anyone has ever done. I can just imagine, Richard Nixon looking at this and saying, what on earth? You put a gun to the guy's head and he withdrew. Now he's a hero. He's a hero.
Yeah, consistency is not really a virtue of the press, and they have their eyes on the prize, and they are now completely behind Kamala. She is the goddess, and Biden is the hero. And I would say, for heaven's sakes, although if one were completely selfless and cared only about the future of the country, we would say that on the basis of Biden's resignation speech, that he should absolutely be out of office now. He's clearly not competent to carry on through the next 6 months, if that's even what he's got left in office. But he's not capable of carrying on until tomorrow. But getting rid of him would be a huge mistake because it would just cloak Kamala Harris with the aura of inevitability and give her a stature which she certainly doesn't deserve. But now, yes. No mention.
Not a partisan reason for him not resigning. And that is, it's not like the dementia hit overnight. Lots of people had suspicions. We thought he was drugged up before the State of the Union. So I had no idea how bad it was until the debate. But it is quite striking that the way he has governed is not like the Joe Biden of the past 40, 50 years he's been in politics. He was always the moderate Democrat. And I think if he had his wits about him, he'd be appalled at a lot of the things being done in his name. He was Mr. Tough on crime, qualms about abortion. He had to explain to the Clintons after the Zoe Baird and Kimber Wood fiasco that, actually, Hillary, most people in America raise their own kids and to make their own beds. They don't all have illegal alien help. He was always the normal one, but once they get rid of the 90-year-olds at the top of the Democratic Party, including Nancy Pelosi, including Chuck Schumer, wow, it is Ilhan Omar's and AOC's all the way down. We saw the same thing with Mueller. And the Russia report, I couldn't believe the crazy things that were leaking from that investigation. Well, now we know he was just the demented old white guy frontman.
Well, that's an interesting theory that leftism is a form of dementia, and I'm certainly willing to sign on to that. And I guess he could be that demented that when he's reading his speeches, he doesn't even know what he's saying. I guess I often, you and I get this question all the time. Do they really believe this? What's their inner state? And one can speculate. Part of me feels like it doesn't really matter whether they believe it or not. They're taking those public positions. But I would say, given the repeated times over the last 4 years that Biden, starting from before he was elected in 2020, has reiterated this offensive, completely counterfactual meme that America remains a white supremacist country, stain of racism. We'll never get our hands clean of it. And Black parents are right to fear for their kids every time they step outside. Unless he's completely incapable of hearing his own words, I think he's been spineless enough that he actually believes this stuff and simply does not have a core set of principles and may just be going along with the flow. And again, as I say, it doesn't really matter whether he believes it or not, because he's certainly put in policies to instantiate those beliefs. And of course, Kamala Harris will make it even worse.
I wanted to ask you in that regard, one of the things that New York Times is bragging about in one of their encomiums to the great Joe Biden, they were going through his list of just endless accomplishments. And they quickly elided the border issue by saying that was an accomplishment in the sense of he has struggled to contain the border. I think he struggled very hard. But one of them was there was a full paragraph on his judges and, oh my gosh, how he has increased minorities and women in the federal judiciary, in addition to, of course, Ketanji Brown Jackson. But I think that you've written extensively about this, and I think the New York Times said 2/3 of his lower court, i.e. lower than the Supreme Court, appointees have been women or minorities, or both, much of the time. And I think you have the actual figures on that.
Well, the first year and a half, I think about 22% were Black women, which is the scariest of all, because if you just look at proportions in the population of lawyers, Black women make up at most 2%. So even if qualifications were equally distributed, there's no way that you could come up with 22% without dipping way to the bottom of that 2% applicant pool. But we know, sadly, and this is facts that the American public just does not like hearing, that the proportion of Black law students who are at the top of their classes is basically zero. This is what got Amy Wax in such trouble of speaking the truth about what she's seen in her law school year after year after year. Richard Sander, the great progenitor of mismatch theory, looked at first-year grades, which is the most objective test that there is in law school, because these are all blind graded. They're very rigorous. It's not just BSing about critical race theory. And 2/3 of Black students are in the bottom 25% of their class, and about half are in the bottom 10% of their class. So when you add that together with the way over representation, we have some really incompetent judges that have been put on lifetime tenure on the bench that should make us very, very scared. Because the quality of our jurisprudence matters. It's not just something that, you just get to a result and the reasoning doesn't matter. No, the reasoning does matter. It allows private parties to plan their commercial transactions. And when it comes to public matters of constitutional law, this is how we articulate ourselves to ourselves and explain the principles that lie behind us. And if you have mishmash, it leads to chaos. And again, let's just say it's going to be so much worse with Kamala Harris. I can't even imagine it.